In a world where people strive to conquer the digital landscape, the best leaders are moving forward and planting flags. This is the Oil and Gas Digital Doers Podcast, where you can hear about the thrill of digital victory and the industry's best guidance on how to win, with your host, Michael O'Sullivan.
She does such a nice job, doesn't she, introducing the show like that? That's Mel. Mel is originally from Australia, I believe, but I think she's been living in L.A., or at least last I heard, Mel was in L.A. But she does, of course, fantastic job with the introduction for both this show and my other one, Oil and Gas Tech. This one, of course, is Oil and Gas Digital Doers, as you just heard her say a few seconds ago. You also heard her say this thing, digital landscape. I forget how it goes exactly, but something about navigating the digital landscape. And, I mean, we came up with that because, you try to write clever things for the little introductions to these shows. And anyway, that's what we came up with. But I started thinking about how, we're starting to put this word digital in front of everything. Well, maybe not everything. We don't have digital French fries yet, but there are so many things. Like we were shopping for a blender the other day. And of course, if you're shopping for a blender, you got to look at the Vitamix. I mean, this is not a Vitamix commercial. I don't get any commission, but I mean, you can't not look at the Vitamix if you're looking for a blender. I didn't know there were so many of them. I mean, I just thought Vitamix is a Vitamix, but no, there's different lines and there's different models and things. But in some cases, you're looking at the difference between this blender, this model, and that one is that this one is digital. Now, the purpose of a blender, the primary function, really the only function of a blender, is that propeller thing on the bottom has got to whiz around, and it's gonna do whatever it's gonna do to your smoothie or your mojito or whatever it is that you got going. But so I don't, digital. I guess it's because it's what we used to be. We would have just said, well, that one's electronic. They're both electric. They both use electricity, but this one's electronic because instead of turning the knob, you push the buttons. But now it's digital, and you see this everywhere. The other thing that's happening is people are starting to create digital versions of things, of like simple things that and I'm not sure they're getting better. For example. I saw a picture of somebody who had created a digital Etch-a-Sketch, and you should have seen the contraption, right? It was like a guy had a glove on with all these wires coming off of it, plugged into a circuit board, and I just thought, an Etch-a-Sketch has two knobs, and you can, and it's the same. Like the output was the same, so why not just? Why the digital? And I think it kind of reinforces this point. Which, by the way, once upon a time when we said digital, what we meant was that it had the display had numbers on it instead of like some sort of a meter or something. Like a digital clock. I had to explain this to my kids as they were growing up. A digital clock wasn't digital because of like the electronics. It was digital because it had digits on the display. That's why we called it digital. Same thing with a digital speedometer and things like that. So anyway, digital means something different now. But like the Etch-a-Sketch and like a lot of other things, I think that we're seeing, just making something digital doesn't automatically make it better. And just because you put digital in front of your name or a thing or the name of something doesn't automatically make it cooler or smarter. However, this is the Digital Doers Podcast, which is cooler and smarter. And because lest you think that this is just a haven for the latest collection of buzzwords, we do actually tell stories here about. I don't tell the stories. We have people that come in and tell stories about getting digital done in the real world in oil and gas and the value that people are seeing from it. And I guess I should be thankful that we don't always have to start every episode by explaining what do we mean by digital. I think we've gotten past that, but you can hear great stories here, and you can get good insights, just like you can with every every one of the podcasts that come from the Oil and Gas Global Network, which is how you're hearing this. You're hearing this right now. I know you're hearing it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but none of it would be possible without the Oil and Gas Global Network, and none of that would be possible without our sponsors. And the sponsor for this show, as you've heard me say before, but I love to say it again, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, HPE, they sponsor this and every episode. Every episode they sponsor of the Oil and Gas Digital Doers podcast. So if you don't know about HPE or you think Hewlett-Packard, that must be those guys that sell the computers at Best Buy, that is not what we were talking about. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, different company, and they're doing fantastic things in the oil and gas industry. In particular, if you are in oil and gas, which you probably are because you're listening to this, and if you have anything to do with edge computing, which almost everybody does these days, then you need to look at HPE GreenLake because I can't pitch it the way that they can pitch it, and I'm really not supposed to. But I will tell you that they just did a new TV commercial. That's right, you heard me, TV commercial. And it's very clever, and it's kind of fun, but it also makes the point about what exactly HPE GreenLake does. So look for that. I don't know, just keep changing the channels until you find the HPE commercial, or just look up somebody on LinkedIn that works for HPE, and I'm sure they've got it in their feed, and you can see that commercial. All right, enough of that. Today, I got a couple of my favorite people, one of which I've known for a very long time, and the other which has been on this show once, and I think on the tech show once, and it's always a great conversation. They're over at this little company called Avanade, and if you know anything about Avanade, you know why it was funny that I said a little company, because they're not a little company, they're big, but they have their Houston team is very local, and they're very plugged into the oil and gas scene. So I love hearing from these guys and just hearing what they're up to and what they're coming up with over there. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the OGDN Spotlight, Kyle Kelin and Thor Schueler. All right, and that gets us to our guests today. As promised, following that snappy musical interlude, I am sitting here at the fabulous Cannon on the west side of Houston, where the birds are always singing and the sun is always shining and the people are always happy. And I'm here with two happy people. You guys are both smiling, so you must be happy. I guess third visit back, Thor Schueler from Avanade. This is now, I think the other two, I think you were on the tech show, right?
I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, you were on one of them. I think you've been on both shows. Yeah. So anyway, so Thor's back to tantalize us with whatever the latest thing is that he's very excited about, and also my old pal Kyle Kelin. We were just talking about how it's been like your daughter's in third grade now, right?
Yeah, she's in third grade, and we worked together when she was born.
Yes. So
before she existed.
So let's do a little bit for those who are not. And by the way, we have high expectations from you guys today because Kyle does a podcast at Avanade, so you should not suck on this.
But I usually ask the questions. I'm
you're
on the other side.
You're on the other side. And Thor has always got plenty to say. So let's do a little bit about first about like who you guys are, and maybe some people don't know who Avanade is. So, Thor.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm going to leave the Avanade introduction to Kyle. My name is Thor Schueler. I'm an innovation lead at our firm, and most recently, I'm working on all things carbon, and that is actually going to be the subject of today's
all things
podcast
carbon.
Here, all things carbon. We're going to be talking about how you are going to get an actual handle on the carbon commitments that you made as an organization. We're going to talk about some of the strategies that we're seeing our clients pursuing and that we're recommending.
Yeah. So, has anybody ever considered the fact that we are also carbon? Like, how does that factor into the whole strategy?
Oh, my goodness.
Like, if you're going to say all things carbon, that also includes humans, which is a treacherous path to go down, I think. So maybe we're just going to stick to the inorganic stuff. But and Kyle, what are you doing? I don't even know.
So I run our energy and chemicals business in the South region for Avanade. So I look after, the clients in that space and, lead a team to, really help match what Avanade does with what our clients need and hopefully deliver some really nice business results for them.
Spoken like a seasoned consultant.
Did that sound very consultant-like? Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, I grew up in the same world, so I have an appreciation.
Yeah, and then for those that don't know, Avanade is a consulting firm that really leverages technology to make a human impact. And like I said, hopefully along the way, it turns into some good business results for both sides. So.
Yeah. And just for the sake of scope, Avanade is not a small consulting firm, right? Like,
No.
Pretty large. Yeah.
$3 billion annual revenue, 30,000 consultants across the globe. So
Small correction, it's 50 now.
Oh yeah, so the number keeps going up as we're expanding pretty rapidly.
Yeah, so you guys, you've got, well, that's one of the reasons why I like talking to you is because you have a lot of, especially for the Digital Doers show, one of the things that I want to always make sure we do on Digital Doers is talk about people who are digitally doing, right? And sometimes a lot of, if you don't have enough scope and enough exposure to enough companies in different places, you don't have, I mean, you guys have a good perspective. So
we all have to say, like, we're not here to make PowerPoints. We're here to actually get it done.
Yeah.
That's a technical term for it.
It is a technical term. Yeah, GST. Okay, so we're going to talk about all things carbon. Before we get into, and you guys have come up with some cool stuff. I'm going to give it away. You came up with this idea called the carbon twin, which is fascinating. But before we get into that, what's the scene out there? Like, we read a lot, and there's a lot of scurrying about in terms of we got to measure this and we got to report on that, and we got people looking and trying to do all these things. Like, what's the scene look like today?
Well, sustainability is a hot topic for all industries.
Sure,
right? And it's driven by some
media,
trends you can't deny. It's driven by some facts you can't deny. I mean, the trends are clear, the data is clear, we are in a warming cycle. Now, you can argue all day long whether this is man-made or not. We've got to do something about it.
Sure.
Right? So, a lot of our clients in the space, in the resources space, have made commitments to that respect. Starting with very tangible things like, no more routine flaring, things like that. A number of companies have committed to that. To a more holistically, we're going to try to be carbon net neutral by such and such date.
Right.
Usually it's like 15, 20 years out. But 15, 20 years is not a long time if you think about moving an industry as big as energy. And so then the question, of course, becomes, well, how are we going to go about it?
Right.
How do we actually get to the point where we are energy producers that are carbon net neutral? It's a challenging task, right? No doubt about it.
It does seem like it's different this time around. Like in my career, we've seen the recycling campaigns, we've seen green energy, the environmental stuff. I think for this time, it seems there's a reputational capital at stake. Investment communities now getting involved, and before we've even now seen real regulatory compliance come down on this, companies are deciding to really do something about it, and they're actually really out there. We're working with them, and they're you see in the news they're trying to actually do stuff now.
It's not a head fake.
It's not a head fake. It's not what they call greenwashing. It's not greenwashing within the industry.
There's some of this going on, but to drive that point home, Engine One. Taking 2 seats on Exxon's board is a big example of that. Dutch court ruling that Shell is not doing enough. This is a court with jurisdictional authority ruling that Shell is not doing enough on the emissions reduction front. So there is real pressure on that. This is not a feel-good story. We have to figure this out. We have to act on it, because if we don't, others will tell us what to do, and that is never a good situation. Right? We always want to control our destiny ourselves, and so we're trying to get ahead of that situation where others are telling us what to do.
Right. So, I want to back up to a couple things. One is this whole thing about greenwashing, or people who aren't companies who maybe people are skeptical that companies aren't really serious about what they're saying. So I have a theory that some of that, in some places, that and these dates like 15 years and 20 years, they seem kind of arbitrary, right? Like based on what? Like the former consultant in me says, okay, you can't pick 5 years because it's too close and people are still watching what you're doing. So you got to pick a date that's far enough out that you can change things between now and then, but it's close enough in that it seems like you're serious, right? Well. But I think a lot of this isn't. It's not that people don't have the right intentions. It's that they're not exactly sure what to do.
It's a big problem.
But there's pressure to do something.
Yeah.
So we have to do something, but we don't know what it is. So let's at least make it look like we're trying to do something.
Well, I think there's a bit more to than that. There's, these dates are actually informed by asset life cycle durations, right? If you think about it, if you have a facility in production right now, it's a multi-million-dollar facility, retrofitting that with the latest technologies to reduce emissions might be very, very costly. But that facility might have been already around for 15 years. It might have a remaining life cycle of 15 years. So some of this goes into that, right? How do we look at asset replacement strategies? New assets coming online will operate cleaner. That will help us. How does that factor into the time frame? So it's not just arbitrary. I mean, there is some thinking that's going into some of these time frames.
For sure, yeah. And I think it's just that people are skeptical, right? People are.
But look at too, like if you're running a company and you wanted to create a big change in your company, you would come out with kind of a big, hairy, audacious goal that's a little further out, right? And then underneath that, you're going to then break that down. I think we're in that stage where the companies are breaking that down now. They've made those big statements in the press. And they're now trying to figure out, okay, now how are we going to achieve that?
And there's another thing to this, I would say, and we talked about this yesterday, right? And I think Kyle said to me, we were talking about a different podcast that we're doing, he said to me, look, we can make a real difference here. And when I'm 90 years old, I think you said, right? I want to look at my grandkids, and when my grandkids ask me, well, why didn't you do anything about this whole...
I'm going to say I did.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like, well, why were you successful? Well, I still tried.
Yeah, the dinosaur grandparents, by the way, were having the same conversation prior to the and arguing about whose fault is it, right? But but seriously, so in that whole, like, you're describing this whole, like, this is all the stuff we got to do, and people are getting serious and they're trying to figure it out. So in there's a lot of attention being focused on measurements, right? Yep. What are we trying to measure? What should we be trying to measure? What's the scene there?
And I'll let Thor jump in because this is definitely his area of expertise. But I think it was like 6 months ago, and Thor and I were somewhere, and he said, "You know, you really can't measure this."
Well, that's the thing.
What do you
right?
mean you can't measure this? Like, that's what we're doing.
That's like what kind of pulls the rug out from the whole thing. If you can't
like, that's not what
the
project is.
So let's take a step back then, and let's talk about what is it that we're trying to actually measure, right? And that's so when we look at greenhouse gases, there are a number of different types of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide being the most commonly known one, and the one that essentially is the baseline, and that we're basically transforming everything into in terms of equivalency, tons of equivalent, right? But really, from an energy perspective, the gas that we're more interested in, at least initially, is methane. And the reason why methane is so important in this equation is the potency with respect to impacting global warming of methane. Depending on what model you're using, I'd like to use the methane life cycle model. 10 years is 85 times.
But it's only like 18% of volume.
12%, yes. 12% of volume, but ton for ton. Methane is 85 times as potent over its lifespan than carbon is, right? And so, if we focus on methane, even though by volume it's small, we can make a real impact. And because the methane life cycle in the atmosphere is only 10 years, we can not just make an impact in terms of reducing stuff out of the air. Right now, we have the additional advantage that the short methane life cycle as compared to carbon dioxide is going to actually work with us. And so we're having two parallel. So
that's really interesting. Like either I'm not reading the right news articles, or I've never heard anybody actually describe it in those terms per se. But that's a very compelling case. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. It goes back to those press releases of 15 years out, we're going to make an impact. The life cycle of methane is 10 years, so you can do some things now
do something in that
will actually show up. Versus carbon dioxide is 50 years, right?
So then, if we look at methane, and there are ways to measure methane. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's impossible to measure. What I'm saying is, it is impossible to measure the footprint of a facility at scale continuously. So that is really my point, right?
All right, so let's say that again. So it's impossible to measure the footprint of a facility at scale continuously.
Correct. And I don't think we need to.
Are we trying to do that? Are people trying to do that?
Yes, people are trying to do that. And I want to explain to you why that is, right? If you look at the ways that we have to measure methane concentrations in the air, there are really four big approaches. And I'll start with the largest one, satellite, right? Satellites, obviously we all know that you can look at atmospheric composition with satellites. We're doing it with stars that are galaxies away, so we can certainly do it with the Earth. Right?
For sure.
No problem. Yeah. And we have satellites in the air. There are companies out there like GHGSat, which have spectrometers as payloads. They look down at the Earth. It's a passive technology, so you're using sunlight hitting the Earth, the reflection, as it reflects back up, depending on what gas is in the air, certain energies are being absorbed by those gases, and you can see this in the spectrograph.
Sure.
So that's how that works. So the problem with that approach is not so much that you can't really measure it exactly. It's actually very exact. The problem is more that one of coverage, both spatial and temporal, because there are not that many of those satellites up there. There are a ton of satellites who do visual.
Right.
There are not that many satellites up there at this point in time
Right.
That do spectrography. Now this is changing because obviously we do realize that we need better measurements up there. So companies are investing into creating better spatial coverage and temporal coverage. And the temporal coverage issue is this: if you think about a satellite flies, right? These satellites tend to be low orbit, so they kind of fly over an area. They kind of circle the Earth fairly quickly. They fly over an area, and you get essentially a point-in-time measure of concentration of certain atmospheric gases over a certain column of air at that point in time.
Right.
So, and depending on how fast you can get that might give you trend information, but it's not going to let you really make a good decision in terms of, if I change these operating parameters, what is it going to do for me? In terms of reducing
Definitely
lights.
a rear view mirror.
It's a rear view mirror kind of thing. Yes.
So,
And
all right. So I just want to not lose the thread. We started out with the statement of you can't measure, you can't do continuous measurement of a facility at scale.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
So
that was that was just one technology, right?
Satellite's one.
Satellite's one. There are a couple of others, right?
Okay.
So the one that's been emerging as the kind of the gold standard for the last couple of years is LiDAR, where you shoot laser into it's a line of sight technology. So you have a camera, you shoot laser. That laser gets reflected, and depending on the atmospheric composition of the volume that you're looking at, you agitate certain molecules in the air. This is the way the laser is tuned. So they are tuned for certain gases.
yeah.
And so you get that result back.
Right,
so
right.
you can have very, very accurate concentration and flow estimates using laser and LiDAR technology. And so those things generally tend to get mounted on fixed-wing aircraft.
Yeah.
So you're flying down a flight path, but again, the problem that you have is the forward field of view.
Right.
So you have a fairly limited view on this one. And then number two is, again, it's a very discrete way to look at things. Now, because you're flying that thing once every couple of weeks or couple of months. Yeah. Now, we do have seen people, use these and do them surface mounted and walk around with them. You can definitely do that. But again, how much...
But all of this, everything you're describing, it just becomes more and more complex and costly and difficult at a certain scale. So
yes,
this goes back to your point.
That's the
this
scale
goes
point,
back
right?
to your point.
Yes.
It's not that it's possible to take these measurements, but what's required, if what's required is we got to start launching more stuff into space, then that's probably not the most efficient way to scale it out.
Or fly more aircraft, or fly more drones.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, all of that. So
drones actually are the next one. You're one level down.
Yeah,
drones are...
by the way, let's not forget that all those things have to be powered by something, so we're just sort of compounding the problem.
Yes. We use solar for that.
Solar powered drone.
Yeah, so
whatever. We have to produce power, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
No doubt about it, right? So solar. Drones are the next step down, and drones use LiDAR as well as a technology, but the difference with drones as opposed to fixed-wing aircraft is that you can fly more often. You can actually, it's not as expensive to acquire, so you can basically make them scale a little bit better. You lose some of the aerial coverage because drones, the problem that you always have with drones is endurance, right?
Right.
How long can they last in terms of before they need to be recharged? So if you have a fixed asset, aside, drones might be a fantastic solution for you to go up and take a snapshot 2-3 times a day.
Right.
Not a problem at all. And then the last method that we have is chemical ground-based sensors, and those are dirt cheap. They're really, really cheap. They give you a concentration. The problem with that is if you think about it, it's a chemical sensor.
Right? They're very finicky.
Not so much finicky, but the reaction volume is very small.
Yeah.
If you think about the sensor area, it's maybe a square inch.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
And so you get a good reading of the concentration right around that sensor, but then you go a couple of feet out and...
All right. So what I'm hearing is this whole measurement thing, we're actually, in trying to do this type of measurement, we've created a problem that's bigger and more complex than the original problem we were trying to solve in the first place.
Right.
Right? Sort of. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm sold on that. But
So we're not doing that.
So
What do you got?
What do we got? Right, so
what are we doing instead?
If you can't measure, right? So
carbon twin.
The carbon twin, right?
Carbon twin, yes.
So
Which
Strommel,
makes me think of twin carbies, which is something that we used to do a long time ago on cars that had real equipment on them. Yeah.
So what we do, and since you mentioned cars, cars actually is a good example for how carbon twin works. When we talk about carbon twins, we're talking about taking what we do with digital twins to optimize process operations and applying that to carbon estimation and carbon loading. And so the way this works is think about the facility that you might operate. You already have a ton of operational telemetry coming in.
Yeah.
You got temperatures, you got pressures, you got flow rates, all of these, and all of these things are easy. Unlike GHG emissions, those things are easy to measure.
Right.
We're doing that all the time, right? We have them.
Right.
And so the question then is, can we use those parameters as a proxy for our carbon footprint at any point in time? And so once we started looking at that, we said, well, let's try this out, right? Let's take a piece of equipment like a car or a pump or a compressor. Let's take it into a controlled environment. In a controlled environment, measurement becomes easy. In a controlled environment, where I have an enclosed space, I can measure concentrations of gases, really easy. I know exactly where to look. I know exactly where to measure. So that's easy. So I have a controlled environment. I can operate that equipment in a controlled environment at various set points.
To test whether your proxy is accurate to
That's
the...
right.
to
Well,
the, right.
Not just so much to test whether it's accurate, but to develop it in the first place.
Yeah, sure.
So you say, okay, fine. I'm looking at this operating profile. These are my various set points for different things, and this is my output for these set points. So you do that. You get a sparse data set. You interpolate that data set, and using machine learning, we can now create a model that I can input my operating parameters, and I get a fairly good representation of my carbon output for that piece of equipment. Now, I do that for a lot of these equipments. I put it all together to represent my facility, and now I have a model that I can use and I'll have literally hundreds and hundreds of inputs, right?
Right.
And it'll give me essentially my carbon score for that asset.
Yeah.
Right? And so now what I can do, now that I know, I can say this, okay, fine. Tomorrow afternoon, I know I've scheduled a satellite run over this asset. So I can look at my operating parameters. I can forecast that, I expect my concentration of gas in this volume to be high.
Right.
Yeah.
I fly over. I use measurement to validate my model,
right,
and to improve my model.
Right. So you're using those measurement techniques as the reality check on your model, as opposed to trying to use them comprehensively across.
That's right.
the whole thing.
So yes,
And I don't know how deep your listeners are in like machine learning and AI modeling, but yeah, I mean, like if you took away a little bit of that complexity and just talked about pictures of people's faces and trying to then take those photos, and you're training that model saying, is this a apple or a banana, and you run it through over and over again. It's really the same process here, except now instead of one parameter, we're going through hundreds, and then again just retesting over and over again. That's the accurate.
So there's a kind of another important component here which is, because the first thing I thought of when you said, so we're going to do this instead, was I thought, okay, well, that's all well and fine, but does it please the people who are looking over the shoulders of the... But this approach, I mean, this is a sound principle in statistics, right?
Yes.
When you have something that's very complex to measure, or to see a trend in, you use something else that you've verified that the curves match.
Yeah,
right?
they do this in the industry already. Like we'll do models of wells, right, when we're trying to forecast how much production is going to come out of them and what the decline curve of that production is going to be. So that statistical modeling is not new.
Yeah,
to the
it's
industry.
like not hokey. This is a so it should please the powers that are trying to, because ultimately all this has to get reported, and somebody has to say, okay, we believe you, and we think that you're doing the right thing.
And even more important than the reporting aspect of it, though, is eventually
has to work.
You can start. It has to work, but you could also then now start testing decisions to say, if I make these changes to that facility, if I do these work orders, what is that actually going to do to the carbon? And so even then taking that and baking it into other systems to say, okay, if I want to shut down these wells because they're flaring, what does that do to my carbon output? and then say, well, okay, yeah, it's actually
modeling it in the twin,
modeling it actually with other factors like the financial and production output.
So you kind of sparked like three things in me. I want to talk about three things. Okay, so first of all, on the regulatory side, right, I have a great example.
Okay.
If you look at transmission, right, pipelines. Mm-hmm. So right now you're being assessed in terms of a carbon load by the EPA.
Yeah.
On those transmission systems, by a methodology called factors, and the way that factors are done is some people at some point in time, looked at various different materials, and basically the statistic modeling came up with, if you have this much pipe of this much material, this size, this thickness, this old, you can expect this much leakage of methane, for example. Right? So it's a factors approach that really doesn't take into consideration whether you're really leaking or not. So that factor is being assessed to you, right? And you're being charged on that whether or not you actually are a violator. Right. And so this is a bad approach. I
always use the analogy of, so imagine if your electricity bill wasn't based on what you used, but the square footage of your house. So 3,000 square foot, you get a $150 bill, 4,000.
We're not far away from that, I think.
What incentive do you actually have?
None.
Every light would be on, AC would be on, right? Yeah. It's the same thing with these factors for.
That's right. And so what we're trying to do is move towards a model where actually good actors are being rewarded, and bad actors have to, pay them more.
Got you. Yeah,
right? So that was the one thing. The other thing then that you were talking about, I have a great example of what Kyle was describing in terms of these, check out these, how we could use it to model decisions. We had one client that we looked at, and we built a carbon model for their facility, and one of the components in that model was a fired heater, and that fired heater used the feedstock, right? And so that client changed the feedstock. And what happened is that feedstock that they changed to was a bit more dirty, and so what happened is the heater got gunked up. And as the heater got gunked up, the thermal resistance of the heater changes. It's something that you can very easily measure. And as the thermal resistance changes, what happens is you have to run the heater, at more power to get the same outlet temperature that you need for your downstream processes, and that of course translates immediately into additional emissions. So now you can look at that and you can say, okay, what are my choices here, right? I can change back to the other fuel stock. There's a certain cost associated with that, and I can do that. I can maybe get a different heater that is better able to deal with that more foul fuel stock, so I can do that. And there's a cost associated with that. I can continue to run. I'm just going to run stronger, right? I emit more. There is a cost associated with that, and that cost might get higher and higher as the regulatory frameworks evolve. So, and we can basically bring those decisions now to you and saying, hey, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And that's one of the strengths that digital twins bring us, and that we're bringing into this whole carbon discussion using the carbon twins, is that what if modeling, right? That simulation of what will happen to my carbon footprint, my production, and my cost if I take certain actions.
Well, and so presumably what you're describing could be done in the composite, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm trying to, because I also have to make financial decisions, right? So if I say, okay, I'm just looking at this heater problem. Well, maybe financially right now, the best thing for me to do is just to run it harder, and I know that's going to create more emissions. However, if I can digital twin model a lot of operations in the aggregate, then I can say, okay, but I can do this other thing over here, and let me model that and see that I can pull out, and so I can stay
balance,
right. So I can make those. So I can still make smart business decisions across the entire, across everything.
And Michael, I want to go back to what Thor said about the current regulations and factors, because I think if we don't move away from factors into actual real measurement of holding companies accountable, they're just going to sell off old assets to other companies.
Yeah,
that's already happening.
That's right.
I was trying to be very positive in how I said that, but so right now, like the quickest way to hit some of those carbon goals is to take that 30, 40-year-old asset that is very pollutes and has emissions, sell it to a smaller company.
Yeah, well,
now you look
we've
clean.
noticed quite a lot of portfolio swapping over the last year, and companies being bought.
So again, if we can move away from factors, because the reason they're doing that is it only looks at how old that asset is and certain parameters of it. It's not looking at actual, how to fix that.
I want to give you a slightly different spin on that. I agree with you, but the more positive spin on this one is, if I am an operator and I want to essentially optimize my portfolio, right? Carbon twinning in its various stages allows you actually, before you make a purchase decision, to take a look at some of these assets to understand. It's like buying a house, right? If you buy a house and your roof is 30 years old, it's about to fall off, you're going to factor that into your purchase price, right? Because you're going to have to replace that roof. Similarly, we see a lot of companies are starting to think about, okay, fine, if I buy an asset, what's the emissions profile look like? Are these emissions operational? Are they incidental? Are they fugitive? If they're incidental, and by the way, an interesting thing, when we talk about these type of emission types, operational emissions are emissions that happen just by switching on the equipment. Think about your car. You go into your car, turn the key, exhaust comes out of the exhaust pipe. That's an operational emission. When you run certain equipment on a production site, it will generate emissions. So we have to think about how do we minimize those, increasingly buy equipment that runs cleaner, and then offsets the remaining emissions with offsets like replanting trees or getting credits for renewable fuel stocks and things like that. Incidental emissions is a totally different matter. Incidental emissions happen if I am a negligent operator, essentially, right?
Sure.
I have I have a compressor failing. I have a downstream buildup of pressure. In order to prevent an explosion, I have to vent. That's an incidental emission, right? Totally preventable, because if I do my predictive maintenance, my predictive analysis on this equipment, I probably can forecast that this compressor is about to go back 3-4 weeks out, when I can do something about it before it happens, right? So when we look at that and then say, okay, fine, are our emissions operational? Are they incidental? If I have an asset that's operated very dirty because of incidental emissions, I can easily fix that.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Yeah.
If I have those capabilities in my organization. If I have operational emissions that are very high or a lot of fugitives, that means I have to spend some money to actually replace equipment. So that changes the valuation of the asset.
That's huge. So I have to pause for a second, and I have to compliment you guys. So I'm going to do the Avanade plug right now, because you guys have a really good, strong understanding of the industry and what's like kind of making the industry tick right now. And I'll tell you that. So apart from so OGGN has a sister company, Modal Point, where we do a lot of consulting work for companies that are trying, like go-to-market consulting for companies that are trying to sell solutions in oil and gas. And earlier at the start of this year, I consulted with 3 different large companies that are well established, and said, because they were trying to figure out how to kind of align their solutions to what's happening in the industry today. And I said, all 3 times I said, you need to align them with reshaping portfolios. Like that's because for this problem that you're describing, for how do we get more out of the assets we already have. Yep. Like, forget about exploration right now. Forget about, you need to align your solutions to reshaping portfolios and optimizing portfolios. And I got deer in the headlights from everybody. So because a lot of times people have offerings and they kind of fundamentally understand how that offering applies to the industry, but they don't really know what's happening. And this is really key stuff. So anyway, well done on that. But
thank you.
But what but of course, the first thing that comes to my mind when you say this, though, is, and especially since we talk about getting digital done, how does somebody go from I'm listening to this and I go, I'm sold, I want that. How do I get there? And the fact that your consulting company makes me worry a little bit that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money and all of that. So time to value is critical now, right? I need value in 30 days. I need value in 90 days. How do I get there from where I am?
Call Avanade? Is that the answer?
Of course, that's the answer, right? So yes, I'll give you the 4-step program, right? How do you do it? So first of all, when we talk about this with our clients, a lot of our clients are working on this stuff in terms of point initiatives in certain facilities, trying things out, right? That's great, and that'll help you get experience and appreciation of how hard this stuff really is. But really, to look at it from a comprehensive perspective, you need to have an end-to-end strategy. And your end-to-end strategy, you start by looking at your value chain, and you start by decomposing your value chain and identifying along your value chain what your emitters are and what the emission profile of these emitters are. Is it operational? Is it an incidental? Is it a fugitive? So that's a taxonomy exercise, right? It's very cheap to do. It's not very expensive.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, you know these value chains, you can break that down. That's fairly straightforward, right? So once you've done that, and you can look at each of these emitters in your value chain, and you can ask a very simple question: how am I gonna, number one, assess this emitter with respect to the emissions contribution that this emitter makes under various circumstances? And number two, what might I do to reduce the emissions that are being produced by that emitter? And so then the answer to that question depends, right? In some situations, things like carbon twin might help you.
Right.
To optimize operations and reduce emissions, to prevent incidentals. In some situations, what you might want to do is bring new technologies in. So, for example, cross combustion to do a clean burn. Now you're emitting CO2 as opposed to CH4, which maybe doesn't sound great. We're putting CO2 in the atmosphere, but again, remember ton for ton, 84 times, right? Yeah. So if I can remove a ton of methane out of the air and emit a ton of CO2, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Right? That's awesome.
Okay.
Don't put that on a bumper sticker.
Yeah, that's awesome. So so I'm laughing because you know how sometimes when you listen to like things like trainings or webinars or whatever, and we all do this, right? We all bump the speed up to like 1.5 so you can listen to it.
That's Thor. Thor's already on 1.5.
Thor, you got to turn it down. You got to like cut it to half speed.
That's right. That's excited, right?
I mean, I think the other part, though, like we see our clients that we're working with on this. You kind of got to go into it knowing that there's going to be some R&D and some experimentation. Yeah. This isn't, an ERP system that you can go when you're evaluating. Okay, which of the 3 ERPs do I want to buy and implement?
Well, thank God it's not an ERP system because we spent a lot of time and money on those.
But it's like Thor said, mapping out the taxonomy and then starting to experiment in certain areas and certain of those assets to figure out how to measure and make progress.
So you're saying that the hard part isn't necessarily wiring up the carbon twin.
Well,
technology is always the easy part.
Yeah, technology is the easy part. The other thing is
getting the data and doing all like that. Yeah. That part is pretty.
The data is a little hard.
Yeah.
But again, you try not to boil the ocean, right? And that's the third point, right? So you do taxonomy.
You have 15 years, remember?
Yeah, you look at your...
we got plenty of time.
You do your emitter assessment, and then you pick the ones where, you can make an impact quickly, right? So, and that for each operator, that might look just a little bit different, right? Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to get that totally comprehensive view that is 100% correct. You're not gonna get there. You don't need to get there, right? That is not the point.
Enough, right.
The point is identify how can we get the handle on the on our biggest emissions the most quickly so we can do something about it, make it actionable, right? And so that might, for some, that might involve flying satellites and doing satellite capture to inform the modeling. For some, it might be, you already have a good digital twin strategy in place. You have all of these parameters already. Let's just lay it on top. It just depends on where you are in your maturity right now with some of these digital transformation strategies, right? And so it's a different story for everybody. But you can make an impact without breaking the bank. I will say that. Yeah,
well, that's good because there's not much bank left to break in a lot of cases, right? People need to see results really quickly. So good. So we are. Let's see. We laughed about how we would never be able to cover this in a reasonable amount of time. However, I think we're at about. Well, we're not even at 40 minutes yet, so we could stretch. Well, what else do we want to talk about here?
I will tell you this: if you're interested to actually see how a carbon twin works, I do have a video
now
out
you're
there.
Getting somewhere.
So just check out my LinkedIn.
So it's a real thing.
It's a real thing. Yes, actually, there's a physical piece of equipment, and I actually walk you through.
I saw that.
How we do.
It has like lights on it and stuff.
Well, the lights are not the important thing. The lights are just.
It reminded me of remember, I don't know. Did you do this when you were a kid, in school, when you were learning, in elementary school, and you were learning about how electricity works, and you make that the board with the light bulbs on either side.
I did that with my daughter.
And you connect it to the battery and all that. Yeah,
it is very similar. Yes, but so we actually built a small facility that's a fully functional facility. That we can illustrate how we go about creating a carbon twin, how it works, what we can tell from it. So check out that video. It's a 4-minute video.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what else? How about any stories and Kyle, I'm making some space for you in this conversation.
Appreciate
So, like any good client stories, where people are actually, and you don't have to name names, but where people are doing this kind of stuff, seeing value. How's that going?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few. I mean, I think again, the ROI that we think of in traditional sense is not there yet, right? There's not heavy fines coming yet. It's really reputational capital. It's also,
reputational capital. I like that.
It's also, I mean, internally for your employees, right?
Yeah, sure.
So
right,
we're
because
in a very
employees
hot.
care about this as well.
I know. Maybe people with more gray hair haven't cared as much, but like definitely new employees coming in, and it's a extremely hot job market, and so that your reputation in being a polluter could discourage employees to come work for you. So I think we see companies now looking at that as well as part of it. So the ROI, I guess, when isn't necessarily in the traditional sense of tangible yet. But yeah, I mean, we have clients that we're working with right now that are using this carbon twin concept to measure things, and then using some field service tool to create a work order and action and get it resolved. And I think part of also what we're trying to do there is make sure that field service tool feeds that information back in. So if you go out and have a false positive, we don't want to keep sending that service tech out to fix that.
So that whole closing the loop thing is really important in this. You know what I love about this conversation, though, is that throughout this whole thing, we haven't had to stop and talk about what is a digital twin. So that tells me that we've reached a certain point. Because it was even just the beginning of this year where we would have to spend some amount of time on this episode, like
debunking the buzzword.
What is it? Yeah, what is a digital twin? Is it real? It means something different to everybody. So it's good to know that some of these things are, kind of like cloud, right? Like we went through that phase for cloud, and so it means that we're making progress if we don't have to stop and clear up all that ambiguity about everything.
For your listeners, since you are plugging this so nicely, I will say that I have two conferences coming up that I'm speaking at about carbon twinning. One is the digital future digital oil and gas, and the other one is
that one's in Aberdeen, right? Or
no, actually it's in use. It's virtual, actually. Yes, it's Aberdeen, but it's virtual. Yes, the other one is it's in December. I forget what it's called though.
Yeah.
What about COP?
We have COP coming up. Yes, so there's the UN conference on global warming happening in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
So Thor actually has a booth there.
I'll be there. I'll be there showing off digital twin, carbon twin capabilities to the participants and the clients. We're going to be on stage.
So do you? But what I want to know is, do you wear the hard hat when you do all these things? Because the very
no, we've had field service webinars and demos that we've actually had somebody wear a hard hat.
The very first photo I ever saw of him, you had a
the wearable with
the wearable.
That was at the conference. I was actually on stage doing some stuff.
That was very cool. That was very cool. So all right, cool. Well, this is probably I would usually ask like, how do people learn more about this stuff? But you already filled that in.
There you go.
Any Kyle, are you being a celebrity in any events?
I am not. I kind of ride tourist coattails a little bit.
Well, somebody has to get the work done.
Somebody has to get the work done.
Yes.
That ain't me.
Field those leads when they come in. But no, I really appreciate this. This was fun.
It was good. So let's we'll wrap up for today. But it would be great to have like maybe in a couple of months or something, we could do like a follow-up episode.
Absolutely.
Or maybe we'll do a show on an episode on the tech show where we dive into a little bit more how this twin works and things like that. I think some people would probably be interested in that. But that is going to wrap us up for today. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you coming over here in the rain and all of that.
Always glad to come out in the sunshine.
All right. All right. Thanks. Well, there you have it, folks. Didn't I say? I said it was going to be good. I think I said it was going to be good. Anyway, if I didn't say it was going to be good, I meant to say that it was going to be good, and it was good. Always great with Thor and the whole Avanade team. Kyle came along this time. It was great to catch up with him. And in the interest of time, because I went a little long on my opener, you probably noticed that, I'm supposed to keep them to like 5 minutes or less, and I went a little over 5 minutes, but I was kind of on a rant about that whole digital thing. So I'm going to make this really quick. I'm not going to say any of the things that I usually say at the end. I will thank our sponsor, HPE, again. I will remind you to check out the Oil and Gas Global Network, OGDN, and find out about other things that are going on. And I will remind you about the thing that I said at the beginning, which was just because you put digital in front, you take something that's really pretty simple. You put digital in front of the name, it doesn't automatically get cooler. But you know who is cool? The people who come on this show and they talk about how they are actually getting digital done.
Come back next week for yet another exhilarating expedition into the very real world of the best digital doers in the oil and gas industry. A production of the Oil and Gas Global Network. Learn more at ogdn.com.